Angela and I are joined by Kramer here, the Catholic coach on Instagram, to talk about the Eucharist and much more. Kramer, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. I enjoy following you guys on Instagram. It's good to be with you.
Yes, yes. Well, we're going into the year of the Eucharist and the Eucharistic revival. So, how has the Eucharist impacted your life?
Oh man, yeah, it's a big thing for me, and my kind of reconversion back to the faith. In that it's it's something that kind of drew me back. I'm a cradle Catholic, so I was raised Catholic, uh, and um, I think like most young Catholics, kind of was disinterested in my faith and began to fall away as you go into the high school and college years. And when you get to college and you no longer, are walked by the hand by mom and dad to church, you kind of fall into the worldly things. But after I got done with college, I kind of started to, look at things from a different perspective and kind of look back on what my parents did, and the seeds that they planted, and kind of started to ask questions of, why did they do those things? Why did they go to mass and pray the rosary and, go to adoration? And as I began kind of my journey back to the Lord, it started with just falling in love again with Jesus Christ, the person, and wanting to build that relationship with Jesus. And for me, as I grew closer and closer to the Lord and desired more and more to be as intimate with Him as possible, I found myself coming back to the Eucharist. And the more I researched and the more I dove into the truths of the Eucharist, that is when I began to realize that without it, I could not have as intimate a relationship with Jesus that was possible here on earth. I could talk to the Lord in prayer. I could read the Bible. All those things are great ways to be intimate with the Lord, but there is no greater way to be intimate with Christ than through the Eucharist. And once I realized that, that kind of clicked for me to say, I have to have this. I have to be united with Christ through the Eucharist so that my relationship can be as intimate as possible with Him. And once I came to understand those things, then my faith life just exploded, and my desire to be with Christ, whether it was through prayer, through reading the Scripture, but most especially going to Mass and going to adoration to be with His true presence in the Eucharist. That's when I really started to explode in my faith.
That is awesome. So, how has the Eucharist helped you as a husband and father? I imagine that's a big impact, as it is for me.
Yeah, yeah. So I have four kids now, and I have a fifth on the way who's due in January. So,
Congratulations.
um, that, as you guys know, being a parent is this experience of complete self-giving. Complete self-giving, in that once you have a child, it is no longer what I want. It is no longer concerns for yourself. It's no longer, I gotta, take care of myself and look at it. It is solely focused on your children and what do they need from me on a day-to-day basis. And the same can be said about being a husband, to my wife. It's no longer all about me. It's what can I do to serve my wife and give of myself completely to her. And when you began to contemplate the Eucharist and what it truly is, this full self-giving of Christ to us, that I think helps you kind of hone into your responsibility as a husband and as a father. Because in the Eucharist, we see that, Christ gives of Himself, full body, blood, soul, and divinity, to us in the Eucharist so that we may receive Him. And that idea, that action of the Lord is what we are called to do as husbands and fathers, is give our whole selves, give our whole selves to our wives, give our whole selves to our children. And through that, you hope that they begin to see the image of Christ in you, so that they more seriously will desire to not only portray Christ in their lives, but invite them, invite Jesus into their lives. So it's been a big piece for me, helping me become the best husband and father I can be. And, as we say, the more you spend time with Christ, the more you become like him. Going to adoration, you cannot not be affected by it. Receiving Christ into your body, you cannot not be affected by it. So I think it has allowed me to, although I fail often as a husband and a father, I think it has helped me to improve, and it helps me to desire to continue to strive to be the best I can be in that vocation that I've been called to.
It is when you become a father and a husband, which is going to reflect a little bit Christ as a father with us and husband with the church, how you can really fully, at least understanding more in a bigger picture, yourselves, your sense of how far you going to be giving yourself somebody else. I mean, sacrifice Christ had himself on the cross, how much he's going to die for you. And I mean, I think it does help, at least help me a lot. And I mean, on embracing that side of the reality.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's this idea that, like in human terms, and, I've talked about this a lot in the past and made, posts about it, but in human terms, the most intimate relationship that we have on earth from a human standpoint is the relationship between a husband and a wife. There's no closer relationship of this idea of two people giving their entire selves to one another. And most especially and most intimately through the marital act, when a husband and wife come together and my wife gives of herself completely to me and I give myself completely to her, and our two flesh become one. And that idea is so profoundly made true and manifested in the Eucharist. This opportunity that we have to receive Christ is that same type of intimacy that a husband and a wife can fulfill, is Christ through the Eucharist giving his entire self to me, and me as I approach the altar giving my entire self to him, and then our two flesh, his body, blood, soul, and divinity, and my flesh becoming one through my consuming of the Eucharist. And that is just profound and amazingly impactful when you really begin to understand the reality of what's happening. And that is why I think all Christians need to know, yes, you can have a profoundly intimate relationship with Jesus, whether you're Catholic, Protestant, whatever it may be. However, you cannot have the most intimate relationship possible with Christ unless you receive the Eucharist. And that I think that message needs to be preached throughout the world. And that's why I'm so appreciative of what you guys are doing with your ministry and now the Eucharistic revival. I think everyone needs to hear what the Eucharist is and what it can offer.
You had a chance to see our trailer.
Yes, I did. I'm fired up for when it comes out, because I mean the combination of just a film about Christ portrayed from a Catholic perspective, but also the interlocking of Eucharistic truths are something that I'm pumped for, and I'm going to continue to support you guys. I'm going to continue to spread the word about it via my influence, and I'm looking forward to it, man.
Great. Well, Kramer, we want to show it for those that haven't seen it yet.
Man, I say to you, this day you shall be with me in paradise.
Unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you will not have life in you. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. For my flesh is meat indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. believe. I am with you. I am here. Believe. Fight. Fight, my son, fight. I am with you all days. All days.
The fact that you can tell that it's going to be centered around John 6, with all those quotes. It's so good, because when you approach John 6 again and you sit with it and you contemplate it and you read it with an open heart and open mind, you can't not see that Christ was speaking that this is truly what the bread I'm going to give is my true self, and you cannot have life within you unless you eat my flesh. So that's big time. I'm fired up for it, boys.
Go to the newmannamovie.com and donate. We have a 501c3, so you'll get a tax deductible letter and everything like that. We appreciate it in advance.
What is, for me, it's really interesting. And I mean, I think most people would love to know this answer too. How you approach, what are you doing within the moment for when you're going to Mass, to when you're going to receive the Eucharist, that can help you to clear and to be able to understanding what all these beautiful concepts that you just mentioned before?
Yeah. So good. So this is something that I started doing probably, I don't know, maybe a year or two ago. Is in my phone, I have a list of people to offer Mass for. So every time that the priest begins the consecration of the Eucharist, and as the gifts are brought to the altar, as I'm sitting there, I personally offer, firstly, in every Mass, myself, my wife, and my children on the altar of the Lord beside the perfect sacrifice of Christ in the Eucharist. And then I also take one other person. It might be a family member. It might be somebody who reached out to me on Instagram and asked for my prayers. And I offer their petitions beside my family and beside Christ's perfect sacrifice in the Eucharist. And as the priest is consecrating the Eucharist, I am laying my offering beside that offering and asking the Lord to, lift it up to the altar on high and shower his grace upon me and that person that I'm offering Mass for. And then as I'm preparing to receive Christ, I say very simply and very similarly to what I just explained is, Lord, thank you for the gift of your true self. Thank you for giving your entire self to me so that I may give my entire self to you, so that our two flesh may become one. I'm so unworthy to receive you, but if you will it, you can make me clean. And I ask him to enter my mind so that I may discern his will and think his thoughts. I ask him to give me his eyes and his ears and his mouth so I may see, hear, and speak as he wants me to. Give me his hands that I may serve, his feet that I may walk his path, and his heart that I may love like him and shine his light to all the world. And that is kind of my prayer as I approach Christ in the Eucharist, so that I'm asking to receive fully what I am. Because I think so many of us go to the altar and receive Christ, but we aren't asking to receive the full graces that we are in reality putting into our body. And I think that's such a key piece to it. And for me, when I kneel before the priest and receive that Eucharist, I think all those prayers and those thoughts that I did prior to receiving allows me to just be fully aware of what I receive and hopefully fully receive the grace that the Eucharist can give.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. That's really beautiful. I mean, I always like seeking to get some other people tricks. I mean, to keep me. Sometimes you go to the routine and you end up using that kind of like a understanding. Yeah.
as parents, we got, I got a 3-year-old jumping on my back, and I'm trying to stop my 2 boys from fighting, so there's distractions, of course, but you always try to, refocus to the altar and prepare yourself as you go up there. So there's challenges with it, especially, as parents, but I think, we do our best to really become aware of what we're receiving. And then God's grace is good. It is sufficient.
It is. Indeed. So you have a great audience with your Instagram page, I'm sure, speaking as well. A lot of people have questions on the Eucharist. They don't understand it, especially those outside of the faith. Has there been something that you've seen that's been most helpful or stumbling blocks to overcome?
Yeah, it's really interesting, in my time on Instagram, and it's for me, my Instagram ministry kind of came out of nowhere. I wrote a book called Fill Your Cup for Christ, and in order to kind of market that book, I published it just by myself. So in order to market it, my brother actually said, "Man, you should get on Instagram as a way to market it." And I thought nothing of it. And I just started sharing some stuff. And lo and behold, 2.5, 3 years later, you have tons of followers, and you just don't expect anything like that. But it was so interesting to me, the more I began to share Catholic truth, that the thing that was the biggest stumbling block for non-Catholics, and the posts that got the most angry commentary and all that, were one, my posts about Mary. That was one that was a big stumbling block. And then two, and more obviously probably, were my post about the Eucharist. And for me, it's one of those things that I try my best to put myself in the perspective of those people who maybe are struggling to understand, because you have to understand, coming from a standpoint of non-Catholics or people who weren't raised in the faith, this is a hard saying, and we hear that this is a hard saying. Who can believe it? So I do my best to put them in my perspective. But what I always offer to those people who are struggling with it is just go into your research with an open mind. Just go into your research with an open mind. And at the end of the day, when you approach, whether it be John 6, or whether it be the early church fathers, or whatever it may be, the Eucharistic miracles that have happened, when you approach those things with an open mind, I think you will find truth within it. And when you find the truth within the Eucharist, I've told people many times before, if the church is right about the Eucharist, you can't not be Catholic. If the church is wrong about the Eucharist, well, then go wherever you want. It doesn't really matter. But I tell people, all people who are, either trolling me on Instagram or, a little bit interested in the faith, I always say, begin with the Eucharist and start with John 6. Read the early church fathers and look up Eucharistic miracles. If you do those 3 things and walk away not convinced, well, then so be it. But I always say, I promise you, if you look at those 3 things with an unbiased heart and a heart open to the truth, you will find yourself coming to know that the Eucharist is the true body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ. And if that is true, you can't not be Catholic.
That's totally fantastic, brother. I mean, that's why I really love your posts. And and I love sometimes keeping chatting with you, just make a little comment. Wish we will live together. Sometimes, the distance doesn't make it, bringing on fruits. These how beautiful souls like yours. Sincere souls.
Yeah.
And for me, it's that's the reason I think probably God why is delaying this our movie. Because our goal is purely to making this one for somebody else. It's not for money, because we haven't been taking more than almost 3 years. It's going to be 3 years now soon. We haven't been taking 1 penny, me and Ray. Everything was put towards the movie, and we don't want to touch nothing, but we are still trying to finish. I think we finished more than 95% of the filming, but I think probably the reason why God is allowed in this delay is because, I really want to understanding from you guys, from anybody that has been doing, what is what people really seeking, what is the this kind of wording, what is the what kind of saint quote work the best for them, for you, how they help it, because we want to put all this information in the movie. That means we want to try to be able to providing these things. I mean, sometimes we claiming to the church that it's sadly like it was back then with the Pharisees. They are so disattached from the lay people that they are not able to communicate with them anymore. I mean, so that's what I'm seeking. I mean, that's why I would love to hear from you. If there's any saints, any kind of things you see people react the best.
The things that I've seen others react to the best is Pope John Paul II's anything that he puts out, not only about the Eucharist, but about anything. I see great reactions to Pope John Paul II, and how can we not just, one of my favorite saints, and I think that's a commonality across the board with most Catholics and even Christians who know him so well for his evangelization across the world. But one thing I know personally that really enhanced my maybe intellectual understanding of the Eucharist was when I read the Jewish roots of the Eucharist, and I watched like presentations that Brant Preachy put online. That was kind of the first time that, from a biblical standpoint, I really, began to say, wow, this is hard to deny that it's not, the true presence. And he talked obviously a lot about, the Jewish, roots of things, and, the Passover and the Paschal mystery. And, one thing that really stood out to me is, and again, when, your guys' film and its title is when Christ said, the manna from heaven, they ate the manna from heaven and still died, and I am the new manna. And that idea of typology, of connecting the Old Testament with the New Testament, really opened my mind to say, wow, if the Old Testament says that the manna that came down from heaven was bread from angels, this is heavenly bread. And now Jesus is saying that manna wasn't sufficient, but what he provides is sufficient. So it is an impossibility to say that the Eucharist is just common bread. It is an impossibility to say that the Eucharist is just a symbol. You can't say that, because Christ compared it to manna, and we know that the manna in the desert was bread from angels. And if his new manna is greater than the old manna, then the only thing that can be greater than that is himself, is his true body, blood, soul, and divinity. So that kind of connecting the Old Testament to the New Testament, that Eucharistic typology, was something that excited me in a way, because maybe I'm not that smart of a guy, but I understood that, from an intellectual standpoint. And when I dove into that, the Jewish roots of things and the Eucharistic typology and how everything connected, that's when I really got excited about things, and it kind of opened my eyes to the reality.
I remember sitting in an RCIA class and being told, you should look into this Jesus and the Jewish Roots of the Eucharist book. And I listened to the CD, and my mind was just blown. I recommend that book to every Protestant out there. It is phenomenal.
Phenomenal. I remember the first time I heard Brant Petry's talk is I'm a basketball coach. So I was driving to a high school basketball game to do some recruiting, and I was listening to it on the way. And I almost had to like pull over a couple times and like write down things, because it was just like, my mind was exploding with this information I'd never heard before. And no, I agree with you. I suggest it to so many people. And if you're not readers, he has presentations that are online that you gotta watch. But it is so good, so profound. And that really was one thing that made me just open my eyes a little bit.
It's a game changer, 100%.
It's so beautiful when I used to have this couple of friends that we start together to the same time to study the Bible, and we were so much like on drugs. I mean, for finding so many these Bible passages. You say sometimes we are calling at 2 or 3 o'clock at night. Bro, you check this one. He said, this is incredible. What is that? You would send the picture and say, no way, man, that's crazy. It was like one of the most beautiful years of my life, because it was really like you go to adoration. We had the adoration open 24/7, and we were just like as soon as somebody read it, say, oh, we find come over. So we just like driving to the guy's house and start to watching this video. Things. And that's why for me, I'm seeking for people like you that would definitely are inspiring and definitely have a beautiful way to wording things, to seeking these beautiful books, these beautiful quotes, this how your followers, because we are trying to put in the movie, we put so many beautiful inside for I have a beautiful collection from
Thomas Aquinas.
St. Thomas Aquinas, and some of the inside was like why nobody told me this one? This is insane. I put inside the movie, and then like we spoke with Reyes, and said we are going to, after having a commentary about these things, because I mean they might seem like meaningless, but then after, I mean, it's going to really, like, the one that come to mind is when Peter arrived to at the end of the lake before making the miracle. We just with the boat of Peter. When here, and there was nobody else, nobody boat there, which that represent the church, the Catholic Church.
Yep.
They started with us. Then when we moved, they moved it all together to try to find in Christ. On the other side, his boat arrived, but other boats came too, which that represented the Protestant. And as soon as Christ started speaking about the Eucharist, everybody left, and the boat of Peter remaining. And that you reading it means like, it seems like a nothing, but when after St. Thomas Aquinas explained to you, it's like I just need a month off to take in.
No, it's as you said, it's a stumbling block for many people, just as the cross is. And even in today's today's gospel, we said, Christ said, I came to bring a sword, like I'm going to be a cause for division here. And I think the Eucharist is one of those things that does that. And we have a very simple choice. We either choose Christ or we choose the world. And I think as you dive into the truth, it's very easy to decide. But I think so many people are lost in the world and lost in, other ways of thinking, that I think it's beautiful that we're bringing truth, and you guys are doing such great work to bring it to those people who need it most.
Why do you think people have a hard times to thinking that Christ can create in a universe just by speaking, creating a man by speaking, but have a hard times to think he become himself man, but then he cannot be present in the Eucharist? What is the block for them?
Well, I think a lot of people have maybe a misunderstanding that those miracles that happened way back when in the New Testament and all that, miracles don't happen like that anymore. I think this modernism of whether it's science or whatever it may be has kind of brought this idea that no, miracles and healing of lepers and all those things that happened way back when. That doesn't happen anymore. And I think we get this kind of modern scientism kind of idea that nothing like that can happen nowadays. That is back when in the Old Testament, even could be fairy tale kind of stuff. But that's why I think the idea of Eucharistic miracles was such a big deal for me, is when I began to investigate them and say, wait a second, this happened in 2008. This happened in 2012. And realize, no, miracles isn't just something that happened when Jesus was on earth and when the 12 apostles were still running around. Miracles are still happening now. in our modern time. And once I saw the reality of that kind of proof, of scientists being baffled by what was going on, and all this connection between a Eucharistic miracle that happened in the 1800s and one that just happened 10 years ago, that is kind of this idea that I think opens people's eyes to miracles don't just happen back in 8022. They happen now. They're still happening. And once you come to that reality, I think it's a lot easier to believe in the reality of the Eucharist.
Kramer, last question for you. Who in your life had the greatest impact on your faith?
Definitely my father, definitely my dad. He was a huge piece for me, from every aspect of my life, not just spiritual aspect. He's a college basketball coach. He's an assistant at the University of Virginia, but he was my college coach, and a huge piece for me. He taught me so many lessons. But I tell people this often is what he did more than anything. He spoke to me many times, and gave me his thoughts verbally many times, which was fine. But as we know, most kids don't listen to their parents very often, and the words of a father go through one ear and out the other. But what he did for me most especially, and what I'm most thankful for and most appreciative of, is he set an example early on that I saw. I saw that he went to Mass daily. I saw that he went to adoration often. I saw that he spent time in prayer through the rosary and through the scriptures. And those seeds of example didn't produce fruit for me right away. But later on in my life, those seeds of example produced fruit. And that is the encouragement I'll give to all parents, is we can say a lot of things to our children, and a lot of the things we say, they're going to forget, but they are not going to forget the things that we do. And our example is so, so important. And my father's example is, in my estimation, the grace that God gave me to come back to the faith.
At the beginning, you mentioned something which can be attached with what you just finished now. You say you step away from the church. You had a little moment, I mean, it was a little bit off. What was the thing you think, I don't want to say fail, but that there was missing that allowed you to leave, or was it just a stage of your teenager or childhood, that rebellion stage?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of both. I think, like a lot of us, I don't think I was properly catechized, in a sense that I intellectually understood why we do those things. And many people have spoke on this, and I think Bishop Barron has done a great job of speaking on it, is that I think that step away from the intellectual side of our faith hurt a lot of people, because at least as a youngster, when you go to a Catholic grade school, you're kind of told these are the things we do. We go to Mass, and we confess our sins to a priest, and you have to do those things. But it was like I was yearning for understanding, well, why? Explain to me why I do those things. Like where is this coming from? And whether it was because I was being poorly catechized, or I wasn't listening, probably a combination of the both. I don't think I had a full understanding of why, and where does this come from, and is this true? And I think that led to my lukewarmness. And then, because of my lukewarmness, when you get into those high school and college years, and the world is bringing all these enticing temptations towards you, you tend to go towards that because of the lukewarmness. So I would say it was a combination of that rebellion stage, and being in college and all those things, and a little bit of that poor catechesis and a lack of intellectual understanding of why I need to do these things and why they are so important.
I don't know if you never heard about Jim Bernard. He's an amazing apologetics guy, and he created these beautiful little books about all this why. This apologetics book. We are going to showing now here for people, and there is lots of explanation the why, and the little booklet, but it's so easy to pick it up which one is your weakness, and they are definitely, and they have a nice Bible cheat. So in this way, for every problem, because when he said when he went to college, he felt to be like a Bambi on the deer lights, and everybody was hitting him left and right. So he had to like decide, or I'm going to protect my faith, or I'm going to convert to be an denomination. And I strongly suggest for even for young teen and stuff, because it's so simply done. And then eventually somebody want to go further. And I mean, there is so much, like you said. I mean, there are so many books, so many church fathers. I mean, you get lost. I mean, but that one is definitely it's helping me out a lot.
Well, that's great. Well, Kramer, thank you for all that you shared today, and we appreciate the wisdom and to find another brother in the faith that's pursuing Jesus. It's great to see, and it really is, as we see in the New Testament, a sign of contradiction. Like, that's us today, and thanks be to God for the grace to persevere in that.
Yeah.
Amen.
Thanks
for having me, guys.
Do you want to leave with something else? There is any other things you like to cover? Something that we didn't do it?
No, you guys mentioned it. I'm on Instagram at a Catholic Coach. Would love people to follow me. I mentioned my book, Fill Your Cup for Christ, Spiritual Journey Sown and Grown Through Sports. Kind of gives a little perspective on my life, and kind of the coaching side of me comes out, and I motivate and challenge and try to inspire all of us to grow in our Catholic faith and strive for sainthood. So yeah, please come check me out, and I'll continue to support you guys, and I appreciate you having me on.